Welcome to the podcast, Your Future in Sales and Marketing, the podcast that helps you make great career decisions. My name is Mike Dixon, and I'm a professional sales and marketing recruiter. I love what I do, but my biggest frustration is seeing too many people not realizing their career potential. In this podcast, I'll introduce you to my network, an amazing group of business leaders from the biggest tier 1 organizations through to some super fast growth SMEs. They'll share their career journeys and give unique advice and insights on managing your career and leading a function and a business. Join me, Mike Dixon of AXR Recruitment and Search, to help guide your future in sales and marketing. Well, hello and welcome to the podcast, Your Future in Sales and Marketing, with me, Mike Dixon, Director of AXR Recruitment and Search. Our purpose at AXR is to equip you with everything you need to make a great career decision and to get the most out of your career journey. Now, today's guest steps us out of FMCG and more into the world of tech. We're going to explore the impressive career of Foong through Google to Uber and now as a CRO of Domain. Welcome to the pod, John. How are you?
Mike, I'm very well. Thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you. Really looking forward to this conversation. And as always, we're going to start with a couple of icebreakers to get to know you. Favorite brand, John, and you can't pick one you've worked on.
Favorite brand, I struggle with this one. Actually, I'm choosing Apple, which is a company that I competed against for over a decade.
Yeah.
And I think Apple's my favorite brand, much as I am a reluctant user of them because they've combined innovation and luxury, yet somehow selling to the majority of people. It's very hard to get all those three at the same time.
It's a good alignment, the trilogy.
Amazing.
And a bit about you. Where are you from? Tell us a bit about early life.
I grew up in Sydney. I grew up on the North Shore in Gordon and loved living up here. My parents are from Malaysia and from Hong Kong. And then did my undergrad studies here, worked as a consultant here for a few years. And then the last 17 years, been traveling the world.
Yeah.
Was in Africa, US, Europe, and then finally found my way back to Australia 2 years ago. So
brilliant. Well, we're going to explore all that journey. It's very interesting. We talk a lot in the pod about, and no matter what journey you're on, make sure you create breadth, challenge yourself, gather new experiences, and you've done that, which we'll get into. Let's start at the beginning. So you as you said, you grew up here, completed your undergrad degree at UNSW.
That's right.
What were the career aspirations back then? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think growing up, I wanted to be the Prime Minister. You asked me back in year 6, what I put in my yearbook.
Yeah.
And then when I was about 15 or 16, this is year 9, year 10, I was really involved in the church and I did a lot of volunteering. I loved youth group and was really convicted to either run a nonprofit or to become a church pastor. That was very much my conviction as a 15, 16-year-old. And I think a lot of my choice of next decade or two were guided by that principle, actually. So it led me to seek out a technology, business and leadership degree, which is what I did at UNSW, Information Systems and Management. And then when I graduated, I sought out a job in consulting because consulting is kind of the CEO factory, the leadership factory. And my conviction was I want to learn from the best brands, the best schools in the world, bring that leadership back into the church, back in nonprofit. Because even by that time, I'd been volunteering for 10 years and I was surrounded by people who were very passionate about helping other people, but did not have the organizational skills. And that just meant they crashed and burned.
Yeah.
They went out of business or they had an employee issue or something like that. And I said, wow, if I want to be a successful nonprofit leader, I need to learn from the best.
Well, you started out, McKinsey was your first consulting
That's right.
world. But then I'm really interested because from McKinsey, you worked at USAID.
That's right. Yeah.
Which is, and I had to look this up, it's actually the lead US government foreign aid agency.
That's right. That's right.
And you did a year in Mozambique, but how does an Aussie end up working for USAID?
So, if I think about my consulting career, which is very short, 2 years, it opened up the whole world to me.
Okay.
Because before that time, I'd lived in the same suburbs my whole life, in the North Shore here. Never even aspired to leave Australia. Why would you? Sydney's the best place in the whole world. And I think when you go to a consulting company, particularly one like McKinsey, where, probably half the office is people who are from overseas, who are doing a secondment or have moved here, you get a sense of how big the world is, just how many people there are, how many opportunities there are. The world is so much bigger, than the North Shore of Sydney. And one of the cool things that McKinsey does, it springboards you in different places. So I did 2 years there. And what they encourage you to do is send off your business school applications or graduate degree, whatever you want to do. And while you're waiting for that, they encourage you to get some other different experiences. And so what I did was they have a volunteer program organized with the US government to basically go and provide free consulting, and the US government pays for the expenses over in a third world country, a developing country. And so a lot of the other consultants had gone to Mozambique, and Mozambique had received a lot of McKinsey analysts. And that's what I did. And I stayed there for a few weeks and loved it. I was advising people how to build their companies. And they said to me, hey, John, we've got this big project we need to do for Mozambique. We've got a lot of money to try and figure out how do we turn around the Mozambican chicken industry. And they were looking for a project manager, and I still had 6 more months before business school started. And so I said, sure, I'll try it. And so it was my first leadership opportunity, leading 5 people trying to turn around the Mozambican chicken industry and figure out how to make it internationally competitive. And that's how I ended up working with the US Agency for International Development.
Incredible. I knew we'd get FMCG in here somewhere. We've got chickens.
Chickens, fast-moving chickens.
Fantastic. So that was before business school.
That's right.
Yeah, and business school was in America?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to get into Stanford. So that's in Silicon Valley near San Francisco. And I did a Master of Business Administration and a Master in Education there for 2 years.
Right. Then to Google, if I got this right.
That's right.
But not Google in America. Was it Google in London?
It was Google in London, yes. So at the time, I was thinking about what I want to do next. My conviction was still I want to be a nonprofit CEO. I guess Stanford was an amazing place to learn about that. There's a lot of philanthropy there. There's a lot of fellow-minded people there. And what you do in America during an MBA, because it's a 2-year MBA, there's a 3-month gap in the middle, in between first year and second year. And it's very, very common that you would do an internship. And that often leads to full-time employment opportunities. And coming from consulting and not necessarily a clear sense of what would happen after business school, whether I go back to consulting or doing something else, I had a very wide range of, I guess, things I could do. I wasn't someone who was trying to get into business. I was already in the business world. And what I was really solving for was personal in this case. My sister was in London, and I was thinking, it'd be cool to be in Europe. She was working there, working for eBay. I'd barely been to Europe before. I thought it'd be cool to try something different. And at the same time, this is 2006, Australia had just qualified for the Soccer World Cup for the first time in 36 years. Now, I'm not a mad soccer fan, not at all, right? It's just but us Aussies support everything, right? It's up for a party, up to see, and thought, how can I get to Europe? I could stay with my sister. On the weekend, we can go to Berlin or Germany and watch the football. And there were not that many internships in London at the time. Most of the European business schools are shorter. They're 1 year. So MBA interns in such a big thing. Pretty much the only ones hiring were consulting companies and investment banks, which is, what was my more experience. So I didn't really want to do more of that. And a fairly small company at the time called Google, which was, only a few hundred people at that time in the London office and looking for MBA interns. So it was very short interviews, 2 interviews over the phone. And so, sure, you'll be right. And before I knew it, I was in London, living with my sister, working in London and traveling to Germany on the weekends.
That's amazing. I imagine getting into Google nowadays is probably a bit harder than 2 quick phone interviews and getting in, George.
It's a few more interviews now.
Yeah. And it turned into a long-term stint. You were there for 12 years and in total. Talk me through how that unfolded, because I've met a few people from Google and is it what you can get out of Google, what Google gets out of you? How does it work?
The way I think about Google is it's some kind of cross between like a university campus, and a whole startup entrepreneurial ecosystem, right? It's a place, and it's become a bit more corporate by the nature of it's over 100,000 people now, so it's a little less free. But when I was there, the whole idea is they hire people who they think they're talented, even if they don't really necessarily have the right experience. They just throw them into opportunities, and then because the company was expanding so much every year, new things would open up, and that's basically what happened to me at Google. I came in as a marketing intern. That was what I was studying. And then, they were looking to build their Irish office. So in Ireland, they have a very large office there. It's now, I think, 6,000 people there. It's massive. And they build their European Operations Center is out there. And so they had many teams there and they were looking to grow it. And when I was in London, I was speaking to some people who worked at the Irish office, and I was sharing them my vision, like, hey, I'd love to, become like a nonprofit leader and I want to get leadership experience. They said, look, you come to Ireland, we have thousands of people there already, and we need leaders. I said, but I've never really led a company before. I've just led this project in Mozambique. You'll be fine. You'll be fine, which is a policy that's stopped because it wasn't always fine. But yeah, they said, give it a go. And that's what I was doing. A year later, after I graduated from Stanford, I was a technical search quality team leader. People who served France, Germany, languages I couldn't even speak, managing a technical team. That was my experience. I did that for a few years, but then every few years, something would come up, something totally different. A few years later, they were starting something called Google Cloud, which is the competitor to Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure. It was tiny. It was 2 people selling, and it was mostly selling paid Gmail. There was no such thing as really cloud computing in any mainstream form then. And they were looking for someone to lead that tiny sales team. And I'd be there at Google, and I'd always want to do sales. And I knew if I want to be a CEO, I would need to get good sales experience. And they said, look, why don't you give it a go? I said, sure, be great. So every few years, something totally different would come on. And before you know it, you're there for 13 years.
Yeah. And you had a number of sales roles there eventually. So sales was for you still part of the experience building to become the CEO.
That's right.
And were you still holding on to through that time not for profit? Is that still the goal, or did that start to fall away a bit?
It fell away probably in my so about 10 years ago, it started to fall away. I think my notion of, let me call it a calling, if I go back to my teenage years with Foong, it was very destination focused. Like, I think I'm here on this earth to become a church pastor, or I'm here on this earth to lead a nonprofit, or to become prime minister, or whatever it is, right? And I think when I moved to Ireland and, I was still very involved with the church and leadership, over there, I think a lot of my own development was to redefine my calling from a destination. This is the job I will end up in. That is the terminal part of my career, to a set of skills that could be used in many different places. And for me, that was about leadership and team management. The whole idea being, hey, I'm learning this leadership experience. I learned at UNSW, at McKinsey, in Africa, at Stanford, now at Google. And these leadership experiences can be useful in many places. They can be useful in a corporate, like a Google. They can be useful in a nonprofit, like a church. It could be useful in a government. It could be useful in family. And it's premature to try and figure out what the destination looks like. Because what does the world even look like in a generation? Do we even have that same divide between work, profit, family that we have? And it's changing. It changes every few years, faster than ever. So in my 30s, I guess I redefined my calling from a set of experiences and a destination to a set of skills. And so, for me, it then became, how do I get the right leadership skills to be a great company leader? And that's when, hey, I've got market experience, I've got technical operations, I've got business, I've got marketing. Where do I get my sales and where do I get my leadership from?
I love that perspective, because I think a lot of people get stuck on a particular point, in whether it's an ultimate destination or points towards a destination. And when we define goals in our business, we interview a lot of candidates around their career journey. And the whole purpose behind this podcast is to think about the journey and how you gather experiences and the skills to ensure the journey is fulfilling for you, as opposed to, I've got this job or this salary or this title. They're just little marks along the road. That's all they are. It's looking back at tech, because tech moves quickly, and faster than a lot of other organizations. The world, as you say, never stands still, but tech does move really fast. When you move into a new role in a business like Google, do you inherit a bit of a blueprint? This is how to do it, or is it, hey, conceptually is what we're trying to do, over to you?
It entirely depends, right? So if I think about my first role at Google, my first full-time role leading a technical search team, a search quality team, there was a very clear workflow and a very clear blueprint, and my job was to maintain and evolve it. If I think of my second job, where I'm running the sales team, there was basically no sales structure. There was no, customer relationship management system. There was no process. There were no sales plans. It was like, we want to create something that will also be billions of dollars. Currently, they were a few $1 million. Can you bridge that gap? And so it was all wide open. I think as the company gets bigger, you tend to get more structured. But big companies, and Google's a very big company now, they will create new products, new offshoots, new teams that will have blank space as well. So I think there is a recognition. I think this is something tech does very well, that generally, if you can bring someone early on or give them a problem rather than kind of like something to just be maintained, you will attract a probably more highly motivated and more ambitious individual. And so constantly I can see companies trying to reinvent, or create that either culture or those divisions. Like with Woolies, you might have a Woolies X, for example, where there's an incubator, and everyone wants to have that part of that culture and attract that kind of person.
Yeah, great. Moving back to your career. So then after Google was Uber, how and why did that happen?
I often get the question, how could you ever leave Google, right? And it's an amazing company. They're great people, great experiences. They pay really well. The reality is every job is a certain manager doing a certain thing in a certain company, right? And unless you're just there rocking up to take a paycheck, which some people are, but generally most people want more than just money, all those things are going to be alignment. And if one of those things is off, then this may not be the right place for you. So for me, Google is a great company. And even at the time I left, it's a company, if I could have had the right, setup, would have been great, to stay at. It was still growing big. It probably wasn't as exciting as before, but it was still great. I was working for a great manager. That wasn't the issue. but the job had now shrunk. There had been a restructure, which there often is at Google, and often those restructures, my role had expanded. And in this case, my role had gotten smaller, and there was a fundamental disagreement about what I thought I was capable of versus what the business was able to give me. And at that time, even working for the greatest company in the world, the right thing is to look at your options. And for me at that time, it was like, oof, I don't know if I really want to keep being here, if this is going to be the role for me. And because I think I can do much more. And it so happened that Uber was able to offer me that, a chance running the account management and customer engineering team of Uber for Business, which was a really exciting part and a very fast growing part of Uber at that time.
Did you find Uber or did Uber find you?
A bit of both, of both. So when that restructure happened and I was like, oh, okay, I'm in a smaller role. Right now, we'd just had our first kid at that time. So it was a good time of reflection for me. You then make the decision, and there's no right decision. Right decision is the one for you and your family. Okay, am I going to make this work? It's less than what I want, but there's other benefits. I'm not maybe working as hard. I can work on some of the things that are less urgent but important in terms of my character, my development. So 100 miles an hour is not always the right pace. Far from it, right? So I think once you go through that process of like, okay, actually, no, I want to make a change. Still, I don't recommend jumping there. That starts the process. And that process to me is searching. So for me, I'm just speaking to a whole bunch of people. My KPI for myself is, can I have 20 conversations a week? And out of those 20 conversations, can I have more conversations? And eventually, can I get to some interviews, some actual jobs I identify that are interesting, for me? So I started that engine. And this takes 6 months, 9 months, right? And once you do that, two things happen. You start to figure out what you want and you come across and figure out the jobs, which are the intersection of what you're great at and what you're great for. But at the same time, it's almost like the universe opens up. Like, people will start to come to you. They'll hear that you're looking, or you'll be aware of nudges that you wouldn't see if you're not looking. And at that time, I was looking for advice from folks. And then at the same time, unrelated, so one of my ex-colleagues at Google, who was the head of sales operations at Uber, reached out to me because they're looking for this role. So it was actually inbound, but I don't think I would have heard it or received it if I wasn't in that searching state.
I agree. It's amazing when you're out there in the traffic, what you pick up, whether it's deliberately or by opportunity. But if you're not in the traffic doing that and you're waiting for the world to happen, it doesn't often.
Yeah.
You've got to. I mean, you sound actually like a bit of a recruiter. How recruiters go about their business.
We are recruiting now, actually. Yeah.
Yes. And it's also how we advise people to run their search if they are proactively looking for that transition. In fact, we've got guides in this as well, guys. So if you're looking for a bit of help, we can put you in the right direction. So please reach out to us. But really, really interesting process. I think that makes a lot of sense. And how did it go? How different was it? And what did you get out of Uber?
Yeah, I mean, Uber was fantastic. It was a fantastic company. I think it still is. By that time, this is 2019, it had started to reform quite a lot from its very, in America, we call it bro-ish, but very kind of like aggressive early days where it was probably not a very pleasant place to work. It was a very aggressive place to work. By that time, it had really tried to become like Google, very family-friendly, very values-oriented, very diverse. And so it was an amazing place. I had this really cool role. We're in this fast-growing part of Uber, which is using Uber for businesses, where people are traveling or using Uber for business expense. It's the number one business expense in the world. And my job was to grow those accounts with consulting companies and other large companies that did a lot of business travel. And it was a great job because it was a startup part of a big company. But then 6 months into it, COVID hit. And actually, we saw our business go down by 99%. It was unbelievable because who would travel unless you absolutely have to, or you're an emergency worker? And what happened is that forced us to reinvent ourselves. Uber Eats was a small product at that time, and we created Uber Eats for business, which is, hey, if your company or your team are all at home, how can you send them food or send them vouchers? And we created that. It's a multi-100 million, now a multi-billion-dollar business, at that time. And it was fantastic. It was one of the silver linings of a very dark time, in our history.
Yeah. Great kind of problem solving, though, isn't it? Throw somebody the problem and see what they can do with it. Almost. But, and I've heard you mention before, I can't think where this is from, but to me in a previous podcast, the toothbrush test.
That's right.
And I don't think it's in FMCG terms, people are probably thinking Colgate or something. But in a business like Uber or Google, what does a toothbrush test mean?
So a toothbrush test, and it's an FMCG term. The notion is we should try and create products which are as useful and as frequently used and as well known as the toothbrush. So the toothbrush is literally used by, I don't know how many people, many billions of people twice a day, right? It is an amazing product. And if you apply that test to a product idea, hey, does this product Could this become the toothbrush? Could this be used by a large number of people on a frequent basis that as an essential for life? That often helps you judge the signal from the noise. You're just like, oh, actually, this is kind of a cool idea, but it's a bit too niche. And a company, for maybe a startup, that's okay. For a company like Google, where if you're going to try and build something, you're going to throw a lot of resources at it. You want to be building toothbrushes, things that are that useful. So that's what Google and Uber often try to do, because you could do anything. We had so many different ideas at Google of what we might do, right? We tried to apply the toothbrush test to figure out what are the one or two things we should do versus the 98 or 99. We should say that's a cool idea, but it's not going to pass the toothbrush test.
Yeah, I love how it widens horizons, that perspective. Next, John, was, as you said, right back at the start of the pod, back home to Sydney.
Yeah.
And you're now Chief Revenue Officer for Domain.
That's right.
So was that you wanted to come back to Sydney, or was that just, the role at Domain came up?
Yeah, it was a bit of everything. So the story there was I've been at Uber for 2 years. It was going really well. I was really loving it, really enjoying it. We were building this business. We had overcome the pandemic, or we were overcoming the pandemic, returning to normal levels, except now we have this whole separate business unit that we'd built. So lots to like. And this is one of those examples where, I talked about that alignment of it's got to be a company that works for you, a manager that works for you, and a job that works for you. In this case, my manager changed. And, the manager who hired me, moved on, and someone else came on, and she was fantastic. But she had a different vision for how to structure her business. She was taking over this large business. And part of that was to not have a role that looked like mine. I was in this global role, this global customer engineering account management role. And she had a different view of it, which is, again, totally legitimate. And it's really important as a manager that you really own the structure that you have. And so the proposition I had was, okay, this is happening. It's happening. Do I want to stay in a smaller role, a role that was smaller than what I had, or do I want to look elsewhere? And for me, I think it's always worth really thinking about both. Okay, what would it look like to stay? Could that be really awesome? And then what would it go? So same process I talked about a few years before, going back, talking to people, talking to recruiters, getting a sense of what would be good. Where would the overlap between what I want to do and where I'd be really good for a company. And I was generally just looking in San Francisco. That's where I'd met my wife. We had 2 kids by that time. We were settled there. We were happy there. I thought, hey, let's also look at Sydney. Sydney was managing the pandemic better. This is in 2021. So thought it'd be interesting to look. And then, my family is here, my extended family, my cousins. So let's have a look. And this is one of those things where I think conversations really help. Because if you'd asked me when that change happened at Uber, what do you want? I would have said, frankly, I want a job that looks like the jobs I've had at Uber and Google, working for a big tech company, managing ideally a global team, managing managers, having $1 billion, quota. That's what I want. And as you go through the process, a few things change. You talk to people and friends, mentors, headhunters are like a mirror. They help you see in you what you may not see in yourself until you verbalize it. A few things became apparent. Number one, there'll be a lot of value in me going to a smaller company where I can have a bigger proportion of influence. Because, at Google and Uber, I have these big multi-billion-dollar roles, but I'm, one of 100, 200 director VP level people. Google has thousands, right? And I'm not thinking about Google's overall strategy. I'm thinking about like a particular strategy of a particular product in a particular location, right? So whereas with smaller companies, and Domain is not a very small company, it's got 1,000 people. But, I'm reporting to the CEO, like I'm thinking through the whole company, even areas that don't report into me. Like I feel accountable. I feel responsible for influencing those things on behalf of the customer. So it became very clear to me that in terms of my overall vision of how do I get great CEO training, having experience being closer to a CEO, even to a materially smaller company, would be very, very useful. So that was one change from what I originally thought. Another change was coming back to Sydney. I had not seriously considered Sydney at any point. I actually wish that we have had more of these conversations and always question, hey, things are great, but could things be different if we did something else? But as I started to talk to people in Sydney and look at jobs in Sydney, 2 things became apparent. Number one, in Sydney, my skill set is much more rare. So if you go to Silicon Valley, you look for someone who's studied at Stanford or worked at Google, there are literally 10,000 people at that profile, who all live in a 5-kilometer radius of where we're living, right? Which doesn't make them any less awesome. And you can earn more money there. But in terms of like the uniqueness, if you come to Australia, there's not many people like me. And maybe a lot of people don't appreciate that. But for some people, like actually my current CEO, who's ex-Google for 10 years and also an ex-MBA and consultant, he really, really valued that skill set. So it opens up some unique opportunities that are not so common in countries like America. The second thing is actually the idea of spending time with my family, leaning into my parents, letting my children grow up with their extended cousins, again, we'd never really considered. But as we came face to face of, do we want to move? It was like, oh, that'd be really freaking awesome. Maybe we should try that, And so going through that process, I went from saying, look, I just want a job like what I used to have to actually, no, I would like to go to Australia and I would like to be at a smaller company in a senior role. That would not just be great CEO training, but that'd be really awesome from a family point of view. And that's actually, by the time, it was only just a matter of 2-3 months, my entire search had flipped from being America big company centric to Australia media company centric.
Great. And CRO domain, which it's a brand that every Aussie knows. It's like ubiquitous. Yeah. What does the CRO do? Give me an idea of the scope of your role.
I feel extremely lucky to have landed Domain. It kind of combined a lot of different things. It's an old school bricks and mortar company in a sense. It's a brand name that in Sydney, Melbourne, you grew up with the Domain lift out. But it's a tech company. It's trying to be like Google and Uber, product management, move fast. So it was a great confluence of things that I'm passionate about, but with a lot of that Australian blue chip stability that I also would love to have. And for me, I lead a team about 500 people. And the cool thing about it is I have probably 3 kinds of people. I have people whose responsibility is to own the relationship with effectively every real estate agency in Australia. And as those real estate agencies are trying to help their customers sell and buy houses, or just run their office more efficiently with things such as DocuSign products and things like that, we have a wide range of products that we sell to or through real estate agencies. So I've got about 100 plus people on my team who are the relationship managers. They are supported by another team who are the kind of sales and implementation specialists. And because we have so many products and we want a relationship manager to know all about those products, those relationship managers, those account partners can't go deep on any given product. So we have a team of experts behind them who say, okay, you're trying to sell this. Here's the brief. Oh, great. You've just sold this. Let me help install it for you. And they team of a few hundred people who are in operations whose job it is to make sure that our customers, when they have a problem, get a really fast resolution and ideally to stop those problems from happening. So that's my hat, my CRO hat. And that's a big part of my job.
Great. And how do you connect a complex team like that, 500, to a single purpose and a mission? Because everyone's got their job to do. They've got their head down. I know what my KPIs are. I know what I'm going to deliver. But, the magic happens when they have a broader purpose and they feel engaged in that. Yeah. How do you do that as a leader?
Yeah, there's probably a few different things I look for. The key word I'd say is alignment, right? So when I say alignment, I want everyone in this whole company or the 500 people who, are in my organization to feel like, wow, I understand what's being asked of me. It's something that's interesting and fulfilling to me. And I understand why that matters. So if you kind of, break that down, it's really important as a company, you have an identity. Like, why do we exist? Like for Domain, it's to inspire confidence in life's property decisions. We want, as a lot of our existence, whether you're doing the stressful process of buying, selling, renting, or kind of being a landlord, that we help the process. We make it less stressful, faster. I think it's important to have a sense of a vision as to why we exist, and then a sense of a business model of like, how do we help? And for us, we help by, in 2 ways, we bring products that help people trying to sell their house do it better. And then we bring products that help real estate agencies run their business better. Right? So you imagine kind of we're there to inspire confidence in, Australia's favorite pastime property. We know our role in that industry and that process. And then you want to make sure that every single job in the organization, whether it's I am helping people resolve a problem when they're trying to sell their house and something's not working, or I'm trying to help our customers discover new products that can help their agency run faster or sell a house quicker. You want to make sure everyone can join the dots between what they're doing, that it's clear all the way to that vision. That's what you're trying to do in any company.
So it gives them a nice frame of reference to think, am I doing something that's actually delivering against that purpose?
Yeah, that's right.
So a good kind of decision-making thing for them as well. I like that. Out of interest, when you're recruiting then, what do you look for? How do you kind of assess talent? Is it somebody work well with you and somebody work well within the Domain framework as well?
Sure. Let me talk, because there's many different levels I recruit at, right? Yeah. So we might recruit very junior folks out of college, right, to do customer support or things like that. We might recruit very senior people who are my direct team. Let me talk more, given the clientele of this podcast, at the more senior level, right? So I think Google does recruiting extremely well. And there's a bunch of Google-isms which have stuck with me. And one of those things is you want to try and objectify the interview process as much as possible. Or put differently, we're all biased. We're unconsciously biased. How do you therefore overcome the bias? So there's a few obvious ways, right? Obviously, one step is you have multiple people in the process who are interviewing, and you disaggregate decision-making so anyone can say no. That's the important part. So part one is I try and assemble a diverse panel of people who maybe think differently than me, maybe are outside my organization. And even though maybe as the hiring manager, I make the ultimate go decision, anyone can say no go. That's one part. The second thing is you want to have a very clear criteria of what you are looking for in terms of the attributes of success. So for example, when I'm looking for a senior role, a role that's reporting to me or one level removed, there's 4 things I'm looking for. There's strategic ability. I want someone who can, just like I articulated a strategy and join the dots, that ability to say, okay, here's the property market. How are we going to play? Where's the opportunity? Where's the threats? And have a demonstrated ability to have done so in previous work. That's one. Secondly, collaboration. No one in the organization gets to tell anyone else what to do. Even the CEO is amazing. He is ultimately employing a bunch of volunteers, people like me. Now, I'm a paid volunteer, but he knows that if I don't have my emotional engagement, right, then we might as well part ways. So you need to find a way to influence without using authority. And to me, that's one of the core 4 skill sets I'm looking for. So strategic agility, collaboration, which is influencing without authority. And the third thing is people management. So we do a lot of anonymous survey feedback and things like that. I'm looking for someone who is an excellent people manager, because ultimately more than half the people, when they leave a job, they're leaving their manager. They're not leaving the job, right? So I know if I get a great manager, I'll get great people. I know if I crappy manager, the good people will leave and they'll attract people who aren't so good, right? And the last thing, I'm looking for functional expertise. So if it's my sales leader, I'll look for a seller. If it's my operations leader, someone who's great at operations. So what I do is I have that 4 criteria. I make that transparent at the start of the process. I make sure that people understand which criteria they're testing. And then as objectively as possible, we're looking, do they meet the bar with multiple candidates? Who overall is the best package? And actually what I do is on an ongoing basis, I continue to use that framework when I'm meeting with people, having career chats, having performance assessment. So there's no surprise about what's expected.
But do you manage a network outside of your immediate sphere in terms of future talent, looking for the leaders that are coming through that you aren't looking to hire right now, but it would be good to know for the future?
Yeah. This is an area where a phrase comes to mind of one of my colleagues at Google who said, your network is your net worth, right? In the sense that your network will ultimately determine your ability to create value, in the future. And I firmly believe that. Even if I think at all the jobs I've gotten, they're basically because of, I think almost every single job I've gotten, except maybe my first job, the Google job, the Google internship, was because of someone I knew. Someone I knew had brought me to this job or offered it to me or referred me or, at Domain, there's a similar story. And so I think it's really important that whoever you've worked with, you're on good terms with, you stay connected to, that you've actually made that connection on LinkedIn, which is my tool of choice, for this. And if I had more time, with a young family, it's a lot of time, I would probably more actively network in terms of going to alumni events or trying to cultivate staying connected. I don't have much bandwidth for that to do it one-to-one. So really, I'm doing it at a scale way, which is LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. And what I try and do is I've got my profile. I'm trying to post content 2 or 3 times a week. That is part of, I'm trying to make sure that it's relevant to my connections. So people are seeing it in their feed and they're reacting to it. It's an intentional strategy for me because I know whether it's me hiring or anyone on my team hiring, they will probably check out that content. They'll say, oh, okay, I'm interviewing with John, or I'm interviewing with someone, who works for John. Let me check out John's page. Oh, wow, he's posted that. He's been at this podcast or whatever it is. We are creating a brand of what my team and Domain represent.
Yeah.
And what I've found is that has been a really good way of, when we post a job, of attracting more inbound interest. And when someone is in the process of helping them vet, is this the place for them?
Yeah, 100%.
And if it is, it actually gets them more excited. So that's now a pretty regular strategy for me, which I've probably pursued more aggressively at Domain than I have in other company.
Yeah, I think it's really valuable. A lot of companies become quite transactional when it comes to talent. And they have a need, they go to market, fulfill the need.
Yeah.
But it's an ongoing iterative thing. You've got to be connected. You've got to build your brand. You've got to do work on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Come on podcasts. It's a long-term investment. This net worth being your network being your net worth, I think is really smart, simple analogy. I love it. Talking about that network, mentors and advisors, do you use them for career guidance yourself as well?
Yeah, I think there's a few different things that I have. I don't have many regular mentors. I have a business coach who's someone in America I've worked with for a decade. I have found coaches, if you're willing to pay or your company's willing to pay on your behalf, in some ways a little, I'll use the term reliable. That's sort of value judgment on mentors. But when you have someone whose job it is to be a coach and you say, look, I want to meet up once a month, that tends to work very reliably. mentors are busy people. They're people like us, our peers, people we look up to. They may not have much time at certain parts of their life, and those might be the times where you need them. So generally, I have used business coaches on a regular basis for advice. I also have a group of my friends from Stanford. There's about 10 of us who we live together at Stanford. They're all business school graduates the same year. We have a conference call every week. They're all in America. And,
Really?
Yeah. And we must talk about marriage and kids and life and jobs and US politics and all that kind of crazy stuff. But I have found that whenever any of us are at a career crossroads, we bring it to that group. So I have my business coach, Brian, who's amazing, and some others who've come my way. I have my, in a sense, council of advisors who is quite active. And then from a mentoring point of view, I tend to go to them at particular points of need. So, for example, I talked about, this is 3 years ago when we're coming to Australia. I have this list of people and I basically hit them all up, and I may only talk to them every 2 or 3 years because we worked together 10 years ago, but they're very happy, to be on that list. And I am that on many of those lists and many other people's. And so that actually has worked better for me than actually regular mentoring, which I found hard to keep up consistently.
And thinking about those, I'm moving towards the end of the pod. We could talk forever, John, but thinking about the advice on those type of sessions you've had or individuals you've interacted with, the coach that you meet up regularly, if you could try and sum up perhaps the best piece of career advice that you've had for our listeners that you'd like to pass on, what would you pick?
Let me give you two. At no additional charge. One is one of my favorite books I've read, and the title will basically tell it all. The title is called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And to me, it encapsulates probably the best career advice, which is to the extent to which you want to progress, whatever you need to do to progress is different to what got you here, right? If you want to be a manager, it's different to what being a great salesperson. If you want to be a CEO, it's different from just being a great manager. And often what you need to do is constantly reinvent yourself. Constantly reinvent yourself. Again, not changing your personality or things like that, but looking at yourself honestly and go, hey, where do I want to go? If it's different where I am today, what are the skills that I don't have or have maybe downplayed that I need to start playing up more or developing? And what can I do about that today? That to me is probably the thing where I want to always be in that mode, that kind of, in a sense, discontent, not with my life, but in terms of I know that I need to change if I want to progress. The other advice is just reflecting on the 13 years at Google is I was very happy at Google. I was very lucky that every 2 or 3 years, something different would come. If I could do it again, I would not have waited for someone to come to me. I would have tried to be in job search mode on a regular basis. That doesn't mean constantly looking for jobs. I mean, you can do that. That's fine. But I've noticed that many people, particularly when they work at a great company and things are great, is they're happy. They're great. And one day it'll change. It'll change because you get impatient or manager changes or the economy changes or some of that will change. And what happens all too often is then, okay, you're stuck. You're stuck. Oh crap. Now I've got to dig up the network, start again. You're at a standing start, and often the good is the enemy of the great. People are so, this is Google. Why the hell would you ever leave Google? And most people never did, or they never did of their own volition. And the reality is there was a better place for them somewhere else in the world. Maybe it was riskier. Maybe it was a competitor. Who knows? But they never even asked the question. And I think when it came to my end of my time at Google, I look back and say, I've been so lucky here at Google, all these jobs and jumps and things like that. But I could do it again. Every 1 to 2 years, I'd probably ask the question, is this still the best place in the world for me? Am I still the best person for Google? What else is out there? And go through that process rather than wait for just people to come to you or a circumstance that forces your hand.
I think that's great advice. Both pieces of advice for the same money. Very, very good. But that last piece, I think often what happens, careers can slow down because of that. You're performing, you're highly regarded, you're doing a good job, and actually before you know it, the contentment slows you and limits your horizons. I think this ability to challenge yourself regularly and just be ready for the conversation and invest in that network continually.
And maybe you mentioned the word horizons, maybe think of a sailing analogy. Imagine the wind is blowing a certain direction and you're in a sailboat. If you just let the sailboats go along, it'll eventually go that way or follow the wind or follow the tide. You'll get there just by staying where you are. But if you're actually in a sailing race, you don't do that. You're constantly tacking. You're finding the optimal way the wind is blowing and use your advantage. And that's how I see careers. If you stayed at Google your whole life, it'd be great. You'd be very happy, all that kind of stuff. But if you want to move, you should be constantly asked the question, where is the wind blowing? Where is my point of greatest impact, of greatest velocity? Sometimes it'll be in the job that you have. Other times it'll be a different job in the same company. And other things will be something totally different altogether. If you want to progress and people listen to this podcast probably do, right? I'd encourage you to be tacking, to be constantly looking where the wind is blowing.
Fantastic, John. Loved the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your insights, your experience, your unique career journey. Everyone's career is unique, but I've really enjoyed getting to know yours today. So it's been awesome.
Thanks, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks to you guys for listening. If the podcast has prompted you to take a fresh look at your career goals and perhaps a bit more tacking, then reach out to any of my team or myself at AXR Recruitment and Search. Now, our purpose is to ensure you're ready for a career conversation, always to make a good career decision. Now, with that in mind, our 2024 career guides, our salary guides come out real soon. And not just a list of salaries, but the specific advice on how to move from one level to the next, how to maximize those steps and experiences. So look out for those. Now, until next time, thanks again, John. And from me, Mike Dixon, keep listening to our podcast to help your future in sales and marketing. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast from AXR Recruitment and Search. We're passionate about helping you get the most out of your sales and marketing career. Keep listening as we bring you more career insights and advice from Australia's top sales and marketing leaders. You just can't get this career advice anywhere else. My name is Mike Dixon. See you next time on Your Future in Sales and Marketing.